Howdy folks. Today we're going to take a look at a couple of common Express issues that people run into. So I've built a nice temporary Express repository here. Let's take a look at it. So we have our controllers folder, right? And then we have inside that, we have our router, our main router that has API, it has the slash. We have our API router, which basically just has the user router at this point. The user router is relatively simple. It has a post to get this. It has a login API. Both of those get a username and password. The creation API checks if the username and password exist. If not, it sends a 400. It'll try to create the user. If there's a failure, it sends 500. Otherwise, it sends a 200. So good so far. And normally at this point, we create a session token, but I'm not going to do that for this example. The login does something very similar. It gets username and password, says, okay, let's try to find a user with that username. If we don't find it, we do a 44. If the password's wrong, we do a 401. Otherwise, we would generate session token, then do a 200. And if there's any error again, we do a 500. The data model, it's basically file-based. It's going to create a data directory here and try to create a user's JSON whenever it gets saved to. So what else do we have? We have this is our model. We have our home directory, which is just kind of like, hey, here's the home page. This is what shows when the user successfully authenticates. We have our index, which has a very hastily written out login and sign up form. And then submission forms for each one of those that use fetch APIs, right? So yeah. And then we've got our server. The only package we're using is Express, just keeping it simple. Our server has a main router. We're using public. We don't really have anything like any JSON, JavaScript or anything, but just in case. We've got a catch-all route, which actually, this is often used for 404 pages. So you return a 404, but you also return like a special page that says, hey, there's a problem here, blah, blah, blah. And we've got our main router set up, which actually has the pages, where the path routes just have those various HTML pages. So let's go ahead and try to start this. Node server.js. Almost immediately we get an error. Router.use requires a middleware function but got an object. Now you notice where this is thrown, this is inside node modules, so we actually have to look down our stack trace a little bit to find out where in our code this actually happened. This is in node modules. Node modules, that's an anonymous function, another node modules, and then this one is express test server.js 15. So if we take a look at server.js 15, that's this line. So it requires a middleware function but got an object. What does that mean? That's very confusing. Well, let's console log main router and let's see what we get. Run this again. We'll get the same error, but now, okay. We get an empty object. That's kind of weird, right? Main router equals require controllers. That should go to the index. Now here's a hint. I forgot to export my controller router. So this is the most common thing. If you see something that says requires a middleware function but got an object, routers like this are actually middleware functions. And if you get an empty object like this, that means you forgot to export anything from one of your controllers. So ports equals controller router. And now if I start it up, you can see it prints out a bunch of stuff. It says, oh, here's the router. All right, well, one problem solved. But now the whole thing just didn't start. I ran it, and it's like, cool, that's great, and then it just quit. Why? Well, because in order to actually have your server go, you can set up all the routes, but you actually have to listen. So unless you're listening on a port, then the system just kind of gives up and says, well, there's nothing more for me to do. Log. Server active. Okay. Run that again, server active. So make sure that you have this app.listen, especially if you have something like you're using SQLize or you're using Mongoose and you're having things that you're waiting on to make sure your server is listening. Make sure those things aren't throwing errors either, because if they're erroring out, they'll never get to the point where they're listening. Server active. All right, so let's take a look Let's go to localhost 3001. We should get our index page. And there we go. Beautiful index page right there. All right, login sign up. Let me pull in our here. We got a console log. Can't find a fav icon. That's okay. So let's try to sign up. Test and test. Sign up. We get a 404. That's interesting. Why did we get a 404? Cannot find route. Maybe it got lost. What's our route? We're trying to hit post API user. Okay. Well, that's kind of interesting, isn't it? Because if I look here, I've got my slash, my main router. I've got API router. Okay, let's check the API router. And I have user, which goes to the user router. And then I have a slash here with a post. But now here's the thing. Look at the response for that. Cannot find route. Maybe it got lost. Well, that's kind of gives us a clue. We're hitting our 404 route, which is not unexpected because you hit the 404 route when nothing else will catch it. But I'm almost positive this is a valid route. Almost 100% positive that's valid. The issue happens to be, and in this case, there could be a lot of things, like maybe this router maybe this one isn't being exported, maybe it's not being hooked up properly, etc. But the issue happens to be the way that Express handles its routing is it's going to hook into the first route that matches. So with index, it was fine because I hit this express static and that said, oh yeah, I know index.html, let me handle that for you. But when I called user API, the next route it ran into was not this main router, it was actually this asterisk here. And the asterisk matches every route. Let's do an interesting experiment. Let's take our static and let's actually move it below that as well, because we know the static works, right? We know this index worked. Oops, I got to restart the server now. Let's restart our server with that. All right, and then we hit this and we get the same thing. And that's because this star route, any asterisk route that you're hooking up should almost always be on the bottom of your code. At the bottom, it should be the last route you register before the listen, because otherwise it's going to take over and match every route. So none of these other routes are even being tried because Express comes across this and says, oh, I found a route that matches everything. I'm never going to try anything else. So if we take this, put it down at the bottom here. So that's one other common error I've seen is where someone has a catch-all route that they put above their actual router, which means it's going to catch things before the router does, just because of how Express goes top down when it's trying to figure this stuff out. So I've restarted that. Here, now let's try to sign up again. Clear that here. Now, ooh, we got a 500. Okay. 500 cannot destructure property. Username. Well, that's interesting. Okay, we got an error there. Well, let's also check the server logs. Let's see what we got in the server logs. Cannot destructure property username of request.body as it is undefined. API's user.js 7. Okay. So that's right here. That's a bit of a problem, isn't it? What's going on there? What is request.body? Well, let's console log it. Just to see. Okay, we'll go in here, try it again. It's undefined, so we have no request body. Okay, well, let's go back here. Let's take a look. We can see we're passing the proper content type, application JSON, and if we look at the payload, we can see there is a request body there. It's a valid request body. So what's going on? Well, if your route is a post route, because remember, GET routes don't handle a request body at all. It's a post route. It has the right content type, and you're verified that there is a payload. The issue might be, if you go to your server, we've not set up the Express body parser. So Express doesn't parse the post body by default. I don't know why. It seems like a useful thing for it to do, but it doesn't. So we have to tell Express how we want this body parsed. This is a JSON body, so we need to say app.use express.json as a function. What that does is that registers a middleware into Express that says, hey, if you get a body and you get the content type of application JSON, go ahead and take that raw body and parse it and put it on the body field. All right, so that's all we had to do for that. Just adding that middleware there. Let's check it out again. Let's rerun this. Server active. Sign up. Okay. Well, now we got, where's my response? Oops, here we go. Oh, okay, so we didn't get that, but you notice how it's pending, right? We got a little bit further, but this is just pending. It's sitting there. It's churning. Now, part of that could be, and you see we get our body now appropriately. So that worked. The body worked. But now, here's our other question. Why is this just churning? Why is this pending? Why is it sitting there? And eventually, this is going to time out. If we take a look at it, oops, and we say, okay, you know, let's take a look at our timing here. Request is not finished yet, but it's taken a really, really long time to just sit there. This is unusual for an API to take this long. Well, the reason is, okay, if we look down, okay, we've got our 400 has a dot end, our 500 has a dot end, our 200 does not. So because of the way that JavaScript is set up with promises or callbacks or various things, Express does not automatically end the connection to the client when it falls off the end of this function, when this function finishes, because you might be waiting on a promise. Right, you might be waiting on a callback. Maybe you made a MySQL call and you're using a callback and you want to wait till that's finished. Until you call a couple of functions, it is not going to actually send any data to the browser, which means it's going to hold that connection open forever. One of those functions is .end. .end tells Express that, hey, we're done here, move on, we're good. Everything is chill, everything is great, you can finish the connection. Another is if you said .send and put some text, that will actually also end the connection, but it will send some text along with it. Another good one is JSON, which you can pass an object into. This will also end your connection. So unless one of these end state or JSON, end send or JSON is called on the res object, it's not going to finish, and you're going to get something that looks like this, where it's just pending forever. All right, so let's do this. Just status alone doesn't do it. So we're just going to end here because we don't need to send any data back. Okay, I'm going to kill that. So an interesting thing the browser does at this point is it says failed. It's actually going to, now this is an important thing to know, as soon as my server comes back up, the browser is going to retry this API. So that can, if you're get surprised when you come back to your browser after fixing some stuff and you're like, oh, it already did it. What happened? It's because the browser automatically retries the API. Or, well, maybe it didn't in this case. Usually it does. Like I said, it didn't this time. All right, sign up again. We still get a 500 internal server error, but now it finishes. It says, okay, we're done. We got a 500. We didn't get an error here though. Why didn't we get an error? Well, what happened is we ran into this catch block. And see, here is another thing. This is not necessarily like an error in your server, but it's a problem that keeps you from figuring out what went wrong. This is called swallowing the error. This error message here, it disappeared. We got this catch, we sent a 500 up, but because we never console logged that error or logged in any way, we don't know what it was. And that's not very useful when you're trying to debug what's going on. So to fix that, console that error. And now if we hit this catch, we'll still send the 500 up to the client, but we'll see the error here. I would definitely advise against actually putting your error in like this, because JavaScript backend errors don't look pretty and they're not something you want to send to your client. It's a bad look. And like maybe your client is fine with it, but if you're building an API that like someone else is meant to consume, it's just a bad look to be sending your raw errors because they can't do anything about it. So we put that error in there. We run this, and then we go, okay, sign up. We get our 500 again. But this time, we get server active, we actually see the error. Okay, duplicate username test. Why did that happen? Well, because with our previous status, that .end wasn't there. The user actually got created. So that user with that username was created. It's just the response never returned. So when I tried to create it again and I said, hey, username, password, what's going on? It said, no, duplicate username, we can't have that. But what that means is now I can just ignore this because that I know that sign up happened and I can just try to log in. That's exciting. Log in. 404. Okay, well, let's take a look at this. We've got API user login. Okay, API user login, remember that. Post method. We've got a payload. Okay, we've got the right content type, so we know that should all be working because we already went through that. But this is a 404. Why is this a 404? Well, let's see. Okay, server. Let's trace. Okay, we hit our main router. All right, we hit our main router, hit API, so it should hit the API router. This should hit user, user router. Okay, and now we have login. That's all right. That's correct. We've got the path set up. There's just one problem though. The request method on here is post. It needs to be post because we're sending a body. We're sending a password body. This is a get. Remember, when we have the router dot, whatever we put here is the method. This method has to match in both places. And here we've got a post. Here we've got a get. We could go into the client and change this login to be a post, except that's not really kosher because logins aren't usually gets, and also we want to send this payload. If you do a post or a get request, the username and password, which is unencrypted, go into the request URL. A lot of times in bigger systems, they log every single request URL. And that means that your users' passwords are getting logged into your logs, which is not great because that's not something you want to know. So we want to keep this as a post. So what we need to do then is we just change this to a post as well. Because remember, the method has to match as well. All right, we go here, server active, try to log in again. Lo and behold, now we hit home. This says, okay, path routes, JS10, FS is not defined. Now, the fact that this is showing up here, not super great. This error just showed to all our customers. Let's take a look at path routes. Okay. So the problem here is we're using FS, but we haven't actually created it, right? That's not ideal. So FS equals require FS. That's how we fix that. But how do we fix that error from happening? Well, we have to put a try catch around this. If you don't put a try catch, by default, it will spew the error out to your users, which isn't great. So here we're just going to say console log error, and then we're going to res.status 500 dot, we might even redirect to a 500 page at this point, or a special error page. And something went wrong. Okay, so we're going to try that again. Now we get something went wrong. The error is printed here. Now we can fix it. Fire FS. Restart that. So something went wrong. Path is not defined. Same issue. Okay. Require. But you can see the usefulness of having that error there. Imagine if that console log hadn't been there, we would have no clue what's going on. Path is not defined. Let's see. I think this might do it. Unless the directory's off. Oh no. The whole server crashed. This will happen as well. This is when you use nodemon. So let's see. What is it saying? Express test. Ah, look at this. Controllers public home.html. Well, controllers doesn't have a home or a public. Public is a level up. That's because the directory name here is controllers. So what I need to do here, you might be wondering, why didn't that happen for this? We could get the index page fine. Well, the reason is whenever we hit slash, that actually gets caught by the static because express.static knows how to handle slash and it just loads index.html for us. In this particular case, we're trying to load home without the .html. Which means the express.static won't pick it up because it says, oh, that's not my file. My file is home.html. This is home. And we're hitting our specific code here. So it's important to really understand what your routes are doing, because you could have multiple routes that can do the same thing depending on how you hit it. And this is one of those cases. I think that'll work now. Let's try it. There we go. Now we hit the home page. So that was quite a few issues that we went over. There's probably other different things that you can run into while you're dealing with Express, but these are some of the most common problems that I've seen people run into. If you have any others, just let me know and I'll maybe make another video on them. Anyway, thanks. I'll see you all in class.